We're back and we are visiting with one of our duty experts on the Western Pacific, a man who has lived there and served there for most of his professional life, notably as a colonel in the United States Marine Corps. His name is Grant Newsham, a senior fellow of our Center for Security Policy, I'm proud to say. Colonel, one of the things that you've been focused on, I think, properly, but not enough of us have been, though the administration seems to have been now increasingly seized with it, is a Chinese foray into the Solomon Islands, a scene of some pretty famous battles in World War II over some strategic real estate there. Talk to us about what has gone on to this point, what the Chinese have accomplished so far, and what the United States and others of our allies in the region are now beginning to try to do about it.
Well, the Chinese have signed an agreement with the Solomon Islands, and they wanted to keep the agreement secret. And what it does, if you read the language of it, if you understand the dynamics involved, it potentially gives the Chinese military pretty much free access to the Solomon Islands, both to set up bases, to operate from there, and even to have a presence. And this is a big deal. It's the first time that the Chinese have taken the gloves off and said, our military is coming. Considering that you've got Chinese commercial influence, political influence, and a physical presence in just about every inhabited landmass in the Pacific, that the thing that's missing has been this military component. Now it's coming. I say the gloves are off. And this is strategic territory. It potentially isolates Australia from Asia, from the United States, and it gives the Chinese an operating base potentially down in the Southwest Pacific. The significance of this cannot be overstated, even the timing of it. The Chinese do not feel threatened by the other side, by us, by the Australians. Now, everybody, of course, is, when I say everyone, the Australians and the Americans have realized that something bad is happening. And it's belated, but the Americans are now paying some attention. And by belated, I mean like a few decades late. But the Americans sent out a high profile delegation last week to meet with the Solomon Islands prime minister. And the Australians have been in a sort of a fuss or sort of a tizzy about what to do about it all, thinking that they had things absolutely wired. Turns out they didn't, and here we are.
In fact, as I recall, the Australians sort of came to the aid of this anti-Western prime minister who has known in now formally with the Chinese. Is there anything that can be done at this point if we are seized with the problem and are intent on trying to thwart the Chinese from establishing essentially a military beachhead in a part of the world that is, I guess, well outside that first island chain now, and arguably a very dangerous development.
Well, there are things that can be done. It does help if we do the things we should have done a long time ago.
Mhm.
But what that would and why we have that why there's some grounds for optimism if we go about it the right way is that most Solomon Islanders don't want this deal with China. They don't like
Right.
China. The prime minister, if he had an elect, if there was an election today, he would lose it and probably by a lot. Thus,
Mm.
you can expect him to try and postpone next year's elections. But the
Mhm.
point is that there's so much opposition that if the Americans in particular, and I'll just say them because I don't think they should wait around for any of their friends to do much, uh, that pay attention to this opposition, meet with them, give them some time, support them. Pay attention to women's groups, which are immensely important in Solomon Island society. Pay attention to religious groups. Say, don't deal with this thug that runs the place. Do what
Yes.
you have to do, what's necessary diplomatically, but don't feel like he's the only point of entry to that country. You give the Democrats, the free people, some attention, and you'll find this
Mhm.
actually bolsters their efforts, gives them some confidence, and if you're smart, you're going to preserve that electoral process and have it run freely and let these people do the job, but pay them some attention. We
Mhm.
haven't done this. As just as amazing as that seems, that has been a real flaw in the American approach to the region. But the bigger
Mhm.
problem in the Solomons is that we have not had an embassy there since 1993.
Mm.
That sort of thing matters to people in Solomon Islands. And the Americans have said they're going to fast track an embassy now. But I'm afraid that fast track by State Department time is maybe within the decade. But you've got to
Wow.
get some people on the ground fast. And not
Amen.
just anyone who's available, get some diplomats, foreign service types with that magic, and you give them marching orders to fix this. And if they do, there will be rewards. If they don't, well, they will have employment in some other part of the foreign service that isn't quite so handsome.
Right.
But we
You know,
do have some opportunities.
one of the things that just strikes me about this is a prime example of amazingly, we still have people who want to be our friends there, and they haven't made the calculation that it's better to be America's enemy than our friend, which unfortunately I think is taking hold in a lot of other places. You're absolutely right, Colonel Newsom, about the sorts of things that we ought to be doing there. Let me ask you about one other place quickly that's vital to our strategy in the Indo Pacific, as we've now come to call it, namely the Indo piece, the Indian government. It is, of course, of late embraced, as it has in the past, to be sure, Russia in the midst of this Ukraine business in order to get access to inexpensive, discounted energy. Um, do you consider the developments that we've seen there as evidence that, the hope for having a real partner against our mutual enemy, communist China, is now being dashed?
Oh, I don't know dashed, but it's not quite as strong as it was, say, a year ago or a year and a half ago. Uh, but it's not all that surprising given the complexities of Indian politics, Indian society, that you're going to have all sorts of different opinions and ideas about things like Ukraine, about Russia, about where India's national interests lie. And sometimes the access to cheap oil looks pretty good.
Mm.
The ability to sell some things, make some money when you're a country like India. It kind of looks like an attractive option. And it also takes place in the context of things like the Americans bailing out of Afghanistan. And that
Yes.
really hurt the Indians. And didn't make them feel very good. They don't like being lectured to. Not too many people do, but that seems to be how the U.S. goes about dealing with them too often is lecturing. But it is a there are things the Indians are doing that I wish they wouldn't. But I think they're still strong on China, and it's going to take us to have a deft hand and some patience with them to make this work. But I would note, look at how India is being savaged for what it's doing regards to the Russian Ukraine, or not doing regarding to that system, that situation. And then look at how China is being treated. I mean, China
Yes.
gave Russia the go ahead. China still supports Russia economically, financially, and is probably slipping some military aid in.
Hmm.
And nobody says a word. Oh, it's just said, well, the Chinese are trying to navigate a difficult problem. And yet, India is considered the second coming of Lucifer himself. The
Right.
Indians notice that disparate treatment, and they don't like that, and one
Hmm.
understands it. But it's going to take the Americans to handle the Indians with a deft hand, and the at the end of the day, it is that thing we've got going on with China that matters. And Indians, a lot of them will tell you we've been at war with China since 1962, and it's about time you Americans woke up. Finally you have.
Yeah.
So
Well, let's
it's a
just
tough
hope,
one.
I guess, is kind of the bottom line here, that with a deft hand we can ensure that they are in
Mhm.
fact still on our side in that war with China, rather than finding themselves aligning in some sort of marriage of convenience. I don't think it could be anything more than that with the Russians and their friends in Beijing, needless to say. We're going to talk a little bit more about one of those things that we don't like so much about the Indian government with our next guest, John Prahubdas, about the the Indians' persecution of Christians. We'll talk about that and more. But first, let me say thank you very much, Colonel, for your time today. As always, we're always glad to talk with you and look forward to doing so again next week. God bless you. John Prahubdas up next.